Thanks for speaking with me today. And can you tell me your name and what you do at Newton North?
Sure. My name is Rick Michalka. I teach physics at Newton North High School.
And what's a typical work day for you at school?
This year, my classes tend to be later in the day. So usually I get in, I drop off my kid at the preschool that's a part of the school. And then I go upstairs and prep for classes, which can be like designing lessons or making copies or answering emails or grading things or generally trying to get life in order before students get in. And then I'll teach somewhere between two or three or four classes in a day, and sometimes there's a meeting in there, um, and then pretty much run straight through with lunch somewhere in there until about 3:45, and then I'll kind of spend a half hour or an hour wrapping things up.
Do you ever like work after hours or at home or on weekends?
The short answer is yes. I've really tried to put some lines between what happens in the building, what happens outside of the building. So I do work before hours, before school starts, but that is in the building, and I try to limit what I do outside of the building. So I can't say it doesn't happen, but I try to keep a relatively good work-life balance. So
Thanks.
this year I teach entirely introductory physics, which is mostly ninth graders. Con Very conceptual, a little bit of algebra. I've also taught some other higher level of physics to juniors and seniors, including some AP physics, but not this year.
Let's talk about what happened.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I heard in Newton there was some kind of strife going down. First, what made you guys decide to strike? You don't have to tell me, all the issues, and and how did you feel about it when it happened?
Sure. So we, as a union, began negotiating with the city of Newton in October of 2022, at a time where I personally was on leave during the year. So I was only moderately keeping up with um, the events that were unfolding. But that was months before the contract expired last summer. And there had been very little progress in negotiations, meetings, left without anything sort of moving the needle very much between the two sides. During the summer, the district filed to declare that we were at an impasse, which meant that they could move to have us have a mediator to help us move forward. Not much progress was made with the mediator. And the way that state law is written is that if there's not progress made between cities and municipal employees, then there's fact finding. And after fact finding, what has happened in the past is generally the labor board sides very close to management or often with management, and the city can impose a unilateral contract
Hmm.
after that. And so we got to the point after 16 months of negotiation where we felt that that was impending, and we had tried many other tactics and efforts to move the needle to reach toward compromise without having really any positive effect. And so we were forced to strike as a last resort. And my personal feelings about it, I was reluctant um, to vote to strike, and I think many of us were, mostly because of the disruptions to students and families. It's an incredibly it's a disruptive act on purpose. There's a small part of it that's also it's illegal, right? It's an illegal act, so taking that step is also challenging professionally to do something as a part of your job that is deemed illegal. But I do think it was, at the time, I thought it was the right decision, um, based on where we were. And certainly after the fact, given how events played out, I feel absolutely justified that it was the right call.
What were the key points for you that you felt? I mean, I understand you're part of a union and you're gonna go along with it, but what were the key points that you felt were worth, basically going to the mattresses for it, striking for it.
Yeah, I think that the things we were asking for and demanding for are inarguably good for students. So the highest priorities on our list were increase in salaries for what we call Unit B employees. So those are aides, behavioral therapists, people that work with students who are the most vulnerable, who have the highest needs, and they are paid and were paid a poverty wage, an embarrassingly low amount of money. Some start as low as $26,000 a year in the city of Newton. And so, number one on my list was the people that I work with, the people who I cannot do my job well without, were being paid atrociously low wages. And so we were able to move the needle on that significantly. They're still, at the end of this contract, going to be paid much, much less than they should be. But we made significant progress in that. Other things that were high priorities were demanding that the city commit to having social workers in elementary schools full time so that students don't have to wait 3 or 4 days if they're having a crisis to see a social worker. Paid family leave that's more in line with private sector employees in the state of Massachusetts, as opposed to having it have to come out of our sick time, which means that we would have to not be sick to take family leave in the event of adding a child to our family. There's and not small, but lower on the list is cost of living adjustments that are remotely close to the rate of inflation as opposed to what we were offered
Yeah.
in the beginning. There's more, but those are big ticket items that were important.
You thought it was worth it, you said. Like what did you, why is that, first of all?
I do, partially because after 16 months of, let's call it normal negotiations, we were very, very far apart, and moving towards a place where the way that the law is written in Massachusetts, management has a significant advantage over labor in terms of being able to impose a contract unilaterally.
Mhm.
So in terms of tactical and the strategic decision, it was important for us to take a stand. But also in terms of the things that we won are, one, better for students and families, and two, really reasonable outcomes, I think, that people would agree that employees deserve. Lowest on the list of my priorities is the cost of living adjustment to my salary. I appreciate that I'm not taking as much of a pay cut as I would be at the city's proposal, in terms of keeping up with inflation. But the things that we won are going to allow the city to hire, better professionals to support children, to keep children safer in school, to make sure that teachers have adequate planning time, to make sure that aides are paid for the 10 minutes it takes to get some students to the bus who need to get to the bus. All of those things are things that the city can now tout and say, hey, we now offer these things to employees of this city, and maybe they can start to fill some vacancies that they haven't been able to hire people for. So, we had to scratch and claw tooth and nail, to get things that I think the city should be proud that they are offering to employees.
What do you think you learned from the experience? Like, how did going through this? I don't believe you've been in a labor strike before. How
It's
did
true.
going through that make you feel?
Um, all right, two questions. How did it make me feel and what did I learn? So the feeling of being on strike is often terrible. It was one of the most miserable 2 weeks of my life.
Hmm.
Going out and not doing the work that I enjoy, that I value, and withholding that from students is hard. It doesn't, didn't feel good. Um, and knowing that people are going to disagree with you and disagree with you strongly and take that personally with you is hard. So being on strike is really hard, and also I think the camaraderie and solidarity built between my colleagues and I was also invaluable. So spending time with people who oftentimes we have similar goals, but not a single-minded focus and purpose. Um, that sort of unity is invaluable. And so I think we're much stronger and more cohesive as a faculty, as a union, and as coworkers, because we went through this very, very trying and difficult point in our professional lives together. I didn't know like how discriminatory our parental leave policy was. Um, and it was very eye-opening. Every day we had someone speak at this nightly meeting. It was like, hey, like, here's a thing that's important to me. And it's like 2 lines of the contract, but it is going to change this person's life depending on whether it stays in or whether it gets cut or how it gets modified.
My other question on that is, so do you feel like you learned something about yourself or the city, or I don't know. It's kind of a general question, I guess.
I think in terms of myself, I'm still working on how it's affected any personal growth, but I think professionally, it's a good reminder to consider classroom teaching as part of a much larger picture, in terms of what it means to uh, how you allocate money and resources to value education and what education means to people. If we're raising people who you want to be successful, who you want to have certain values and ideas, then how you pay people and how you set them up for success in school really matters. It was a really good reminder to think about how important the decisions we make, um, outside of a classroom affect what happens inside the classroom.
Hmm.
You asked what I thought about the city of Newton.
Oh yeah, that's the
I think
next
it's also a good reminder to pay attention to local politics,
hmm
and who who affects decisions that affect your life, which is something I was remiss in Newton and also in my hometown of Dedham. It's a good reminder to pay attention to who you elect and what their stances are on things, and to hold people accountable for what they say that they value, and make sure that if that's not what you agree with, that you are vocal about it.
No, that's a good point. I'll let you answer. Would you do it again, um, if you had to, if you were in
Yeah,
the same situation?
in the same situation. I mean, I I cannot imagine what things would have to transpire for us to be in this in a similar situation again.
Mhm.
I hope that I'm never put to this question in real life, because once is definitely enough. Um, and I think, I hope that uh, all sides know that we're serious when we come to the negotiation table the next time. But if we had to do it again, I think that we would. I think these short-term gains that we won are very meaningful gains, and I think the long-term and bigger picture ideas of these are the things that are important in education, and public education matters, and funding it, including paying employees what they deserve to be paid, um, is an important fight, and I think is worth continued fighting.
There's been what, 4 or 5 strikes in districts recently, and we've both lived in Massachusetts for 20 years or so. I don't remember that happening this frequently in the past. Do you have an opinion on why that's happening now?
Hmm. I can't speak as an expert, other than I'll concur that the last 4 or 5 years since Dedham went on strike for a day in 2019, there have been 4 or 5 other districts, with ours being maybe the most notorious, or
Yeah,
got the most coverage, lasted the longest
yeah.
in recent memory. Um, I can speculate about why that's happening. I think in general, public education has received a lot more scrutiny in the last 5 or 10 years than it previously has. I think there are more people paying attention since the pandemic, in terms of public education. People got to see inside of classrooms, um, more than they had in previous decades. And that, I think, more people are paying attention, which is great. And also, when people pay more attention, they can offer their opinions more. And some people have different opinions about what makes good public education, or how money should be spent in other ways. Also, just times have been tight. Inflation hurt a lot of towns. in a lot of places, and Newton is no different. Um, but money allocated for public schools is something that people pay a close attention to,
Yeah.
and so that makes labor disputes more tense, and I imagine strikes more common.
What is the atmosphere now like in school, between you and your students, between your admin? Let's start with you and your students. Like, what did they have to say about it?
I think in like by informal polling, I think many were not all that affected. I think there are some students who were deeply affected. The most vulnerable students missed a lot of routine, missed a lot of services they get at school that help them just survive any day, let alone a school day. So those students were deeply affected. There's also students who missed out on sports and fine arts and field trips and concerts. And I feel deeply for those kids, especially seniors who, this is a huge disruption in their life. I hope they'll take, memories of this as well with them.
Mhm.
But that hurts. But in general, I think we kind of came in on Monday and kind of picked up, roughly where we left off, kind of shake the rust off a little bit, but it's kind of back to business as usual. I think we'll see what happens. We'll be attending school next week. That used to be February break.
Yeah.
And so we'll see if there's any fallout from that or hard feelings, but in general, relationships with students seem relatively strong um, after this. As far as administration, I think within the building, relationships with administration, from my own personal standpoint, are still very strong, partly because our administrators, everyone except the principal, is a member of our union. And so the administrators are Unit B members, so not
Okay.
separate from the classroom teachers, but still um, fighting for and striking for the same things. And so I think they were incredibly supportive and active during the strike campaign, and that has really really helped the feeling of solidarity and unity inside the building. Between uh, workers and district administration, I think there are a lot of bridges that are going to have to be rebuilt. We have a new superintendent who took this job in the middle of a very, very untenable situation, and it
Mhm.
will be interesting to see how Dr. Nolan handles coming out of this level of adversity. Um, Personally, I'm still trying to hold an open mind and willing to give a fair amount of benefit of the doubt, but I think she has a lot of important work to do to put a lot of pieces back together. There's a lot of talk about Newton being an excellent top tier school district, and I think that it can be, but there is a big rift to overcome right now between those parties.
Do you have any feelings from the town of Newton? Was there negative feedback? Was there positive feedback? Did it change your opinion of the people who live there?
That is tough to tell. I think so. One of the things you do while you're on strike is just stand outside and wave at cars and hold signs
Mhm.
many hours for days in a row.
Hmm.
Um, you know, if you were judging by the number of honks we got in support and thumbs up to middle fingers and thumbs down, I really like our ratio. But it is really hard to tell where public opinion lies. I try to do a good job of ignoring article comments and social media, but you never get. I would not say that that's a representative sample, but there's certainly people who felt that the strike was a terrible decision on our part, that we didn't deserve what we got, that we should be locked up or fired or fined, until our bank accounts are empty.
Mhm.
Um, and I understand the anger and the frustration, especially for families of students in the district. Um, but it's difficult to tell how many people that is. My understanding from colleagues of mine who went to like family forums where parents and caregivers spoke, was that the level of support at those was very high, and we are certainly very grateful for the amount of public support we got from PTOs and other parent and community groups in support. So that includes faith-based organizations. There's a parent educator collaborative that worked hard to make sure that people were fed and caffeinated for those 2 weeks. And there was a huge outpouring of donations to our hardship fund for employees who were worried that they might not get a paycheck, or for employees who are going to have to pay for extra daycare this week and in June because of shifting schedules. So the the amount of public support was incredibly moving. It is hard to tell what percent that represents of the town. It's also a tough issue um, to advocate for in a lot of ways. I think it's very easy to say, like, pay the teachers. Teachers are amazing, right? Look at the job that they do. And it's easy to say, like, teachers don't deserve anything. They're lazy. They only work 10 months a year from 9 to 3, and they sat on their ass during COVID, right? So, like, it's easy to say those things, but like, it's a really nuanced conversation when you're talking about, like, hey, this particular subset of the employees, like, is a small role, but like paying them a meaningful wage is like a really, really important thing. Or we're arguing for, one of the things I didn't talk about earlier was like the time on learning agreement, which is what governs like what administrators can tell us to do during a given day, which is like, to an extreme could be like clocking in and not leaving the building until you clock out, regardless of if you need to get a coffee or not,
Yeah.
or exactly like what classes you teach or how many classes in a row you can teach. Those are finer points that are hard to convey their importance to the public, but like having control or ceding control of your working conditions is like a really important thing to bargain over that doesn't translate well to, Facebook comment sections.
Do you think there's anything I'm missing that I should ask you?
Uh, uh, in the uh, previous in like the questions that you proposed asking, you asked like, should other districts do the same thing?
Yeah.
um and I don't think that I can speak to any particular situations, but I do think that you're right in pointing out the trend that, since 2019, and certainly in the last couple of years, there have been a lot of strikes. I think that there's going to be a lot of attention paid to what the rights of public sector unions are, and how they can negotiate in the state of Massachusetts. And also that it's clear that teachers or that educator unions are advocating for things in general more than cities are willing um, to offer, and the sort of general fight over what is valued in public education or how valued public education is, seems like it's going to continue to be at the forefront. And how cities choose to handle that can vary widely. It'll be interesting to see what Newton is like in 4 years when we come back to the table and do this all over again. But I hope, more broadly, I hope that lessons were learned, um, statewide, maybe nationwide, that like these are the things that are important, and people with enough voices will continue to fight for those important things.
Hmm. Well, thanks for your time, Rick Michalka, physics teacher at Newton North and member of the Newton Teachers Association. Is that the
Very
name?
good. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, yeah, my pleasure. All right.
Awesome.